And so without further ado, in the next 10 minutes, we're going to have load shedding. And then at that time, Willie will crack a joke or two while we're in darkness. He doesn't know it yet. But let's get started on this journey. And I quickly want to give a quick overview of what the year 2050 will look like. What are the major mega trends which will shape our world in this space? What will happen in terms of geopolitics, demographics, technology? That will be a quick overview. So I'm going to take you on a fascinating journey into the world 2050 before tea time, hopefully breaking by about 10:30, and that means we've got another 15 minutes that we can use on the panel. Let's get started on our journey. I normally put this slide up to confuse my students. What is the role of a futurist? In essence, we look at the news headlines appearing on a daily basis. And what is the news behind the news? That's actually what we need to talk about. Take a look at what's happening this morning. Strikes in Iran, Russia mobilizing a number of conscripts, and everyone wants to flee Russia. Why are these things happening? What's happening to fuel prices? These are the major headlines, and below these headlines, there are these major mega trends which helps us to make sense of it. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how do we build capacity to understand the implication and meaning of change. That's our journey. What will the future look like? William Gibson said, the future already happened. It is just unequally distributed. So it means that there's a number of things we already know will happen. We just don't know when and to what extent. But the important thing in our journey is firstly to explore the major megatrends which will shape our world, and secondly, talk about the technologies that we can then use to shape that future, because we're not a victim of the future, we can become a co-creator of it. It might mean we might have to change our mindset and our business models. Maybe looking at different ideas around soil health in terms of improving your yield. But let's go and look at some of the interesting journeys and what happened in the past. It's extremely difficult to project 30 years into the future. In the year 2000, full of optimism, this was Francis Fukuyama's end of history and the last man. Liberal democracies will dominate the world and so will open markets. And yet, the exact opposite happened. So in that decade, between 2000 and 2010, the world changed forever. The question is, what will happen in the next 10 years or 20 years? I believe that by looking at some of the major megatrends, we're at the cusp of fundamental change. I'm going to share with you some unique insights that will show you that our world as we know it today will not continue. It'll change fundamentally. You need to be aware of it, because within this world, there's also huge opportunities. Let's go and unpack this journey into the world 2050. We know what happened with COVID. Talking about weak signals that changed our world, a little virus in Wuhan that allows you to get sick and infect other people for 4 days, and only then you realize you got sick and you infected 100 others. That changed our world. The biggest impact, however, we normally play a game at university, and Willie tells me he did his MBA when I left. I was a lecturer at the university for 10 years, and he said, oh, he just missed me. Now, Willie, if you were one of my students, I would have played this game with you called the beer game. It's actually quite interesting. It's where you increase the demand of a product, and then because of this whiplash effect, because this beer game takes about 6 weeks for your order to get to the marketing manager to start the production plant, right? So it's a long supply chain. And unfortunately, as your demand stays stable, but it actually increases week after week after week, you get this huge whiplash effect on one little product. We saw this on a global scale, not only in terms of the supply side, but also on the demand side as well, because consumer patterns changed. And for the next couple of years, we're going to still see this impact. Oversupply, and then a shortage, or a shortage and then an oversupply. We've seen that with vaccines. We're going to see it with cars. We're going to see it with microchips. We're going to see it with energy. So a variety of very important trends which are shaping our financial system, leading in some cases to inflation. So watch out for the bullwhip effect over the next few years. Having that behind us, let's take a look at the major megatrends. Biggest megatrend we need to be aware of is demographics. Demographics is destiny. Not my quote, someone else's quote, but I thought it prudent to bring it up. This is the world population and the growth in it. Before the year 1800, we had less than 1 billion people on the planet. We added 1 billion people between the year 2011 and 2022. 11 years. We added 1 billion people. Before the year 1800, there was never more than 1 billion people on the planet. So starting at about 1800, we had this exponential growth in human population numbers. The biggest population we can find in 3 countries. That little circle you see there, number 1, number 2, and number 4 on the list, namely China, India, and Indonesia. In that circle, 50% of the world population. But that's not the story. You see, what the story is, are we going to fall into Malthus's trap? They call it the Malthusian trap. Now, what did Malthus do? Malthus said, here at the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, he came up, he wrote an essay, and he said, we got problems. Because the world population is growing at a literally geometric rate, whereas our food supply is only growing in a linear rate. So at some point in time in the future, we are going to have a problem, an oversupply of individuals, people, and an undersupply, a huge shortage of basic commodities. So that was the whole idea. He predicted that the world will see about 4 billion people, and then we'll have a massive war. And everyone will go hungry. And, well, that didn't really happen, did it? Why? If we take a look at what The Economist magazine did, they, similar to what Cedric have done, writing reports, keeping stats. So what the Economist magazine did ever since 1850 was to track a basket of commodities. And you know what's really interesting? Although our population grew from 1.2 billion to 8 billion people, guess what happened to a basket of currencies on a price parity ratio? It actually fell by 80%. In the last couple of years, it did pick up. But why? Because of innovation and technology. We had these massive leaps in technology that rebalanced our economic models. I'm going to share with you some of these technology waves a bit later. So very important, the adoption of technology allows us to feed a growing world population. The moment you stop using technology, guess what? You're going to fall into a Malthusian trap. What will Africa's demographics look like? Massive growth. Yesterday I showed you we're going to grow from about 1.2 billion people to 1.2 billion to 2 billion people by 2050, an estimate of about 3.5 billion people by 2100. Unbelievable population growth on this continent. Here's the interesting story. If we compare this continent's population growth with other continents, that's the picture we see. That purple line, that's Africa. The green line is Asia. And we are seeing that Asia will see a decline in population numbers in the next few decades. And we're already seeing a decline in Europe and in other continents. That's the real story, because this is going to get interesting. This is a population this is a civilization that's dying, slowly but surely. Right now, there are more people above the age of 65 than below 18. They are selling more adult nappies than baby nappies in Japan today. Go take a look at the UN population graph. By 2050, you're going to have 3 times the number of people above the age of 65 than below the age of 18. Now this means huge debt. They want the younger population to work and pay taxes so they can look after those that are retiring. This is how populations die. No wonder they got more robots per linked to each citizen than anywhere else in the world, because they're running out of people. You go to a hotel, guess who delivers your food? A robot. In South Korea, same story. They don't have security guards, they have security robots that patrol their grounds. Weird world we live in. So understand this world, and it's not only South Korea and Japan, it's also Germany, it is also Italy, it's also the European Union. A massive decline in population numbers. Why is this important? Well, we believed that China will take up the consumption that is lost in Europe. China will be the big savior. Yeah, it didn't happen that way, because they brought out the one-child policy. And now the Chinese population is expected to be half the size by 2050. So forget about China taking up the world consumption. There's one country with very solid growth, not spectacular, but the United States and Australia. They're looking good. Good population growth. If we look at the developed world, the richer countries in the world, and we take America out of that equation, that's what's happening. A huge decline in population numbers. What impact will this have on our future? Well, we have an environment where people grow older, and yet the population rate is dropping significantly. Now, the important thing is this. You see, there are about 9 different schools of economic thought. 9 different schools. And what's really important that in open market economies, there are 2 main competing thoughts that have been battling each other over the last couple of years. So we have the Austrian school of thinking. This is Schumpeter's crowd. Schumpeterian thinking, or the Austrian school of thinking, is about innovation, light government, allowing the entrepreneurs to flourish, allowing the government to allow this growth to happen. The government being a strong regulator, but not a player in the economy, a strong regulator to allow this growth so that the economies can grow. Then we have the opposing view of Keynesian economics. So the Austrian school of economics is called supply-side economics. It's all about the production and supply of things. The Keynesian school of thinking says, no, the government must play a bigger role by making credit easily available and giving money away so that demand can be there to pull the products through the supply chain. And this created this huge amount of debt. And the entire world is now sinking in debt because the amount of demand they wanted to create through the supply of credit isn't showing up in the financial figures. But it means that consumption is playing a far bigger role in our economies. Now, if you're a 25-year-old and you get married and you have children, guess what? You will spend money over the next 20 years. You've got no other choice. It's spend. In America right now, the estimate is you need about $300,000 in order to raise a child. So when you get 20 to 25, you turn in your little convertible, you have to get a mommy wagon, your starter home is sold, you get a bigger house, and then it's spending. I mean, it's kids' parties and clothes and computers and cell phone contracts and Robux, and 60%, 70% of my monthly income goes towards my kids. That's just how it works. But what happens is if those that can afford this type of expenditure suddenly don't have kids and they're no longer there. What happens if the 25-year-olds, the affluent 25-year-olds dry up? Suddenly, in one decade, they're 10% less, and then 20% less, and 30% less than in previous decades. This means that the demand to spend isn't there. Who's got the money? Some of those that are retiring. And you know what? Above the age of 65, you're not going to spend anything. At about 55, you start worrying about saving every single bit of currency unit because you don't know how long you're going to live and when you have to retire. So you're not spending anything. And that means that the amount of capital in the world isn't circulating through the economy. You see, the important thing about consumption economies is the national income. I get a salary, I pay it to someone else, the money flows through the economy. We call it the velocity of money. About 10 times a year in a healthy economy. In weird economies, it drops considerably, as what we've seen in the rest of the world with quantitative easing. But the important thing is this, that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a very, very important point reached in human history. We're going to reach peak consumption. For the last 200 years, our population have grown, and therefore our economy have grown. And every company says, you know, guys, we've got a 3% growth. Next year we'll have another 3% growth. By 2035, in a number of organizations around the world, the board meeting will go, we are proud to announce that our sales only fell by 3%, where our competitors fell by 5%. For the first time in human history, we're going to see peak consumption. You're going to see the headlines appearing. Cell phone sales are starting to fall. Car sales are starting to fall. Why? Because the 25-year-olds that bought them in the past weren't born. The impact on this on Africa will be enormous because 30% of our GDP is based on exports, based on the demand of this growing world population. We'll need to look at a new economic model in Africa. Interesting things coming in the year 2030 to 2035. That's trend number one. Let's go take a look at another couple of trends. Because of these demographics, we're seeing huge implications for the world of geopolitics. Can anyone tell me what this is? Bretton Woods, famous golf club. At the end of the Second World War, what did the Americans do? They said, hey, let's bribe everyone to be on our side. You know, now the enemy is no longer the Germans and the Nazis, it's now the communist Soviet Union. Yeah, they are the enemies. We're going to be bribing other people. So forget about one-party states and totalitarian rule. It's all about open democracy and open markets. And those of you that buy into that vision, you can come on and be one of my partners. So America kind of bribed the rest of the world to stand in front of it. So the Bretton Woods was never about economics for America, it was about security. So therefore, they opened up the seas and said, you know what, everyone is poor. Everyone's capacity has been bombed out after the Second World War. Who was the only country which wasn't affected? The US. They still had their productive capacity. And they had all the gold because, you know, everyone gave their gold to buy weapons. You get the movie? So they said, don't worry about linking your currency of international transactions are still using the dollar. On the other side of the scale, we have the Soviet Union, they have their own club, and a number of countries aligned with the Soviet Union, countries like Egypt, India, and so forth. But then there were a bunch of countries that said we are not choosing sides, the so-called non-aligned movement. That's also where the terminology Third World came from. The first world was the Bretton Woods guys, the second world was everyone else that joined the Soviet Union, the third world are those that said we are independent, we are not getting involved. But of the 44 countries that linked up to America, unbelievable economic growth. We saw growth in Italy, in Germany, in Japan that was decimated by the war, and yet there was a huge amount of wealth created at that time. Why? The seas were open, everyone was busy with trade, and the entire world moved towards this ecosystem. But then something interesting happened. Because in 1990, what happened? The Soviet Union collapsed. Their centrally planned won't work. The political system imploded and the entire Soviet Union fell. So what happened after that? Well, that was George Bush Sr.'s time. He said, hey, we've got a problem, guys. We need to reconstitute this Bretton Woods thing. We need to come up with something new. But before he got these guys, everyone spoke about the Bretton Woods too. Brett Scowcroft and all these guys were busy planning it. But then the American public decided, no, they'd rather have Bill Clinton as the president, and that completely disappeared off the radar. And this is quite concerning because the system kind of limped on and limped on and limped on. But you need to understand this very important point. Bretton Woods for America was always about security, never about economics. And this is scary. And I'm going to tell you why this is scary. If you take a look at so why would America want open, free seas? One for trade, one because they want to keep their partners safe, and the second one, energy security. They want to make sure they have two battle groups in the Strait of Hormuz, making sure their oil supply isn't being affected by anyone. That was the movie behind Bretton Woods. So here's the scary part. If you look at the size of the American economy, what an interesting country, because they're protected on both sides by oceans. The Mexicans or Canadians isn't expected to attack them anytime soon, so they don't have to spend a huge money on defense. And the important thing is they've got wonderful waterways to float anything in America. It's 9 times cheaper to put something on a boat than to put it on a train. If you don't have a train track, it's 90 times cheaper. Unbelievably efficient ecosystem. Very big economy, and what we've seen from demographics, they will become the dominant players because they have the consumption that the rest of the developed world don't have. Very interesting, and America knows this. But here's where the scary part comes in. If you take a look at the exposure, so the American economy is so big that their exposure to imports and exports is actually quite small. And what do they export anyway? Music, virtual stuff, computer programs, and so forth. Movies. But if you take Canada and Mexico out of the equation, that exposure falls to 5%. And America, if they are hit by a serious recession, might ask the question, you know what? Why should we be the ones keeping the world safe? Isn't it the task of those countries in those regions to do it? Should we really become the world's savior for the next 100 years? And what's interesting, if there's one thing the far left in America and the far right agrees upon, is to get America out of the rest of the world. So if there's a political shift, watch how America might pull its armed forces from a variety of places. Let's go take a look at energy security. Why else would you have battle groups around the world? And how would you project power to make sure your energy supply is secure? But what's happening over the last couple of decades is that the energy flow from the Middle East into America is declining. Right now, America is a net exporter of energy due to fracking. So, firstly, not a huge amount of exposure required from trade, and secondly, they don't need the security of the world for energy security. That means there's a big, big move towards decoupling. Forget about globalization, that world is over. You're now seeing America, instead of buying the cheapest microchips in Taiwan, they're saying, oh, that's a security problem, we better manufacture it in America. So for the next 3-4 years, huge investments in microchip manufacturing in America. Why? It's going to be more expensive, but who cares? Because they're independent. No longer a reliance on the world global trade system. And this will impact every country around the world. The entire world of free trade is over. It's going to be about local politics, regional politics, which partners you choose internationally, and how you can secure your own shipments. One of our predictions, increase in piracy. So go and invest in some anti-piracy ship technology. Some good opportunities there. Right, what else is happening in demographics? Let's take a look at real politics. We all know the European plain. You know that great part over there? That's the European plain. That's where the armies in Europe always keep on, attacking each other over the European plain. You don't go over the mountains, are you silly? The European plains is really important. So why do we have the conflict in Ukraine? Well, there's a variety of reasons, but the biggest one is demographics. Financial implosion in the year 2000, and what happens when people are not happy about the economy? They stop having children. In the next 5 years, Russia will lose 50% of its armed forces. Silly 18-year-old kids that will go and die because some dictator wants them to go and die. But in the next 5 years, those individuals won't be there. 50%. And Russia was really worried because in the Soviet Union times, their borders were behind these strategic choke points, and they only needed 500 miles of border over those European plains to protect Mother Russia. Now they've got 4,000 miles. And in their mindset, so what did they do? These 9 choke points that they wanted, in the year 2000, Kazakhstan, 2008, they did Georgia with South Ossetia, which they took over. 2014, they took over Crimea. They wanted 0.5 and 6 now by going into Ukraine and Moldova, and then the Baltic states. That was the idea. We're going to move in, the economy, the government's going to collapse, and we saw something completely different. Welcome to geopolitics. Russia is really, really screwed. There's what we're seeing, huge impact on the wheat and fertilizer, and there's a real possibility that the Russian state can completely collapse by 2040, even if not sooner. The problem is, you've got 15, 16 different republics, and now you have 15 or 16 people in charge of nuclear weapons instead of 1. Hoo-ha! Anyway, I'm bloody glad I live in South Africa. China. China also has got its own version of Bretton Woods. They call it Belt and Road. Why? There's a couple of critical choke points, the Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz. These are the important choke points for China, and what they've done is a string of pearls to make sure that the energy security is intact. We're going to see wonderful things, even a canal through Thailand, which cuts the travel time to China by 4 days. But the Thais don't want the Chinese to do it, so if there's some banks over here interested, very good investment opportunity. Multipolar power blocks will now emerge. And the most important thing to realize, we're now at the cusp of a change of season. We're seeing it happening. Strife in Iran, change in the world economy. There's an imbalance, there's unease. But what normally happens is that a system emerges, and then over time, the inconsistency in that system builds up, which brings that system to a fall. And 30 years later, the whole thing starts all over again. This is human nature and human history. There is, right now, a very big opportunity when we look at the fourth turning, a change in our social and economic systems. We've seen it in our economic systems. Think of an economic model. It's like a computer. You drop it every now and again, and then you rebuild it up. And it kind of works the same, but not really. So we get these 30-year cycles. And this is exactly where we are right now. We are now at the cusp of a new model. After the Second World War, mainly labor-led growth. This led to bigger and bigger labor unions, led to an implosion of economic growth by the 70s with a coal miners' strike and the Teamster strike in America, and a new model was created, a model of capital-led growth. Let's go for the cheapest places in the world, go manufacture it there, and the world of general agreements and trades and tariffs and the World Trade Organization emerged. But those days are now over. We're now entering a new era, an era of deglobalization. How exactly it'll play out, we don't know. But this is what everyone is facing. And part of it is a huge amount of debt. So everyone says, hey, it's easy, you know. Well, to fight inflation, all we need to do is to pump up the interest rates. But here's the problem. Because the debt of governments, of individuals, of banks, and of companies have shot through the roof over the last 20 years. And therefore, if you want to pay off your debt, you can't with high interest rates. So over the last 10 years, we had these low interest rates and everyone was spending. That's why The Economist magazine is saying this world of quantitative easing, it's opening up a whole new world. I'm not going to take you through QE, we don't have the time for it, But what's important to realize is this. How do governments pay off this huge amount of debt? Do they default? Oh, that's not a good idea. Do they raise taxes? Oh, not a good idea. What else can we do? Slowly but surely, we devalue the purchasing power of your currency. That's the clever part. We say inflation is 2%. Not really. We kind of lie. We play with the figures. But year after year after year, your currency buys less and less and less and less. And that's a scary part, because let me show you this. When the baby boomers hit 35, 30% of them had a house. When they hit 40, 42% of them had a house. That is the baby boomers. One generation later, Generation X. When Generation X hit 35, 19% of them had a house. At age 40, 25% of them had a house. The millennials are now entering the market, 35 years old. Look at the percentage of homes that the millennials own, 4%. Do you understand the impact of our monetary system and this rapidly declining purchasing power of our monetary unit? This is why we're at the cusp of a fundamental change. We might be at the cusp of a deleveraging. Go take a look at how the economic machine works on YouTube if you want to understand what the deleveraging is all about. So, what will happen in the next couple of years? Well, fortunately, you don't have to be depressed. This is called the depression session by everyone. Let me take you in the last 10 minutes through a fascinating journey. While although we need to worry about these trends, the technology will lift us up to an entire new plane. And part of the technology we're going to talk about today will do just that. So the world is in the doldrums, believe me. All of the things I spoke about is inflationary. What is happening with technology and new technology? It is deflationary. It makes things cheaper. It makes it more efficient. And the other speakers after tea time will show you in the farming community how the unbelievable increase in technology will have a huge impact on the costing structure in the agricultural space. This is Kondrativ, Nikolai Kondrativ, realizing that every now and again when the world goes through these depressions, look at those depressions, and every time after that, an unbelievable growth in technology. Everyone is in a major depression. Suddenly there's electricity where there wasn't before. Well, imagine that, right? There were no cars, suddenly there are. There were no telephones, suddenly there are. In a period of 10 years. No electricity, no cars, no internal combustion engines, and then 10 years later, a brand new world. We are at the cusp of the sixth wave, but we're not there yet. So unbelievable technologies and what Schumpeter predicted with the sixth wave, huge things that'll happen. Let me quickly take you through some of them. Firstly, a new type of civilization. We will become a type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. What does that mean? We need to be able to harness energy in a different way. And how are we going to do that? Here's one experiment, ITER. The International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor currently being built in the south of France, looking at hydrogen to smash atoms together to get helium and energy. Exactly the same process that happens on the surface of the sun. And if we can get this to work, we will enter a period of energy abundance. Now, if you have an abundance of energy, you don't pay per megawatt, you just pay for access. Think of your phone. You don't pay for the use of processing power. You don't pay for the use of storage space. When you're on a fiber, you don't pay per megabyte. You just pay and you access it. So it's the quality of the access, not the amount you use. The same will happen with energy by 2045. Think if you have an abundance of energy, the impact it'll have on agriculture. Think of the impact that abundance of energy will have on water supplies. These are the technologies which will mean that we as a civilization will stop burning things to remain alive and will become a level 1 civilization. We're already using the very big nuclear fusion reactor called the sun to create brand new ways of harnessing energy and even to drive our vehicles. Dramatic drop in the cost of photovoltaic cells. On the 4th of July 2012, the Higgs boson vector was discovered, that particle that gives mass to everything around us. And very soon, we will use computers to create smart materials like this, where you'll have a car where the energy will be stored in the body of the car rather than a battery inside the car. So if your daughter comes home by 2030 and said, "Dad, I scratched the battery," you better be worried. We're seeing brand new type of buildings emerging, buildings with green all around them, with trees and vegetation. These grow lights, they will be utilized for those seeds that the potato seeds, yeah, you want to grow this thing, use these grow lights. The guy's got a Nobel Prize for it, so just go and use it. Because photosynthesis happens with a blue light, a little bit of red light. I might be wrong, you guys have to help me here. Maybe it's more red and a little blue, but hey, this purple thing is all about grow lights. I was in Abu Dhabi 3 weeks ago. You don't go there to buy salad. They grow the salad in the supermarket. The same will happen in South Africa, by the way. They'll grow, so you'll go to a supermarket where they grow the vegetables. I don't know, I think potato is still safe for a while. What will happen in the not too distant future? We will become masters of our own evolution. We will take a look at our DNA and our microbiome, and based on that, we will create a diet. We will use wonderful things like this. This is an aura ring. That's my DNA, by the way. If anyone wants to take a quick copy, very good DNA, by the way, except a little bit for 1 or 2 little small deviations. Because I realized I've got good DNA, but yeah, there's this one little thing, it's a bit of a problem, and that is that based on my DNA, I might get early onset Alzheimer's. I'm one of the unlucky 3% in the world that might get early onset Alzheimer's. So what do I have to do? I'm going to cheat my DNA. That's what I'm going to do. Epigenetics. Yes, let's do that. So instead of my messenger RNA going to my DNA to create the protein, if I kind of fool this messenger RNA and not give him the building blocks to create the bad proteins, then I might just not get early onset Alzheimer's that early. And that's exactly what I've done. Changed my lifestyle, 1 meal a day, intermittent fasting, stay away from carbs, unfortunately. But for the rest of you, potatoes are very good. For me, carbs are not really that good. So based on my diagnostics that I do, based on DNA, microbiomes, as well as sleep management, I can then manage my own personal health better. The same will happen to you. You'll do your DNA, you'll do your microbiome, and you'll see which foods will help you to live a longer, healthier life. This is an important trend. We see this picking up more and more and more, so the type of food you will eat will be directly linked to your own DNA and your microbiome. Okay, let's go take a look at what impact this will have on farming. Well, firstly, there will be digital adoption. We're going to talk about that, where we adopt things to make it quicker and simpler and better. We will also have digital transformation. We will change an entire process. So now you can open up a bank account by simply using your smartphone and your face. We're going to be utilizing digital disruption, where we will disrupt an entire industry. For example, you can now wear one of these watches. I'm going to briefly speak about these, specifically granularity. That's the second change dimension. Fine, minute little pieces of data that we gather that allows us to create a better projection of our harvest in the future. If you haven't measured everything on your farm digitally, you've lost a year. That's as simple as that. Very important to measure everything. Sim will talk about that as well. But in this world of density, what does it mean? I can now have a watch that can determine I'm going to get a heart attack before I get the heart attack. Why? Because machine learning and artificial intelligence will warn me I'm going to get a heart attack half an hour before I get it. So then the ambulance comes to you, knocks on your door and says, "Oh, there, Peter, you're going to get a heart attack in like 20 minutes. Please come with us." This is what's going to happen. Now think of the company okay, we're just going to wait here for someone to get a heart attack. What do you think is going to happen to their business model? You need to adapt in this model. And this is an important thing for you as potato growers as well. You see, in the past, the information was tightly connected to the entire value chain. The information and the products were connected. You had to be there to count the number of potatoes. Now, in a hyper-connected world, information is abstracted. You can track anything, anywhere, at any time. This is what some of these apps are doing. You don't have to take your products to a central place to sell it. Now you can sell it digitally. The information has been released from its physical prison. Get your mind around this. This is where the money sits in the next couple of years. Everything changes once you do this. Where you get the heart attack, maybe you don't. Who's around you? What's the machines around you? The place. You get the movie. IoT will have a huge impact. Most people say, no, IoT will destroy jobs. We're actually seeing the opposite happening. That's a mine. And every time there's a problem in their scheduling system, in their maintenance system, there are losses. You know what IoT does? It makes those losses less and less and less. With the same amount of people, you can produce so much more. That's what we're seeing. What will happen by 2050? We'll have these drones flying all over us 24 hours a day, staying aloft for 2 months. This is already happening. Above the Strait of Hormuz, the UAE's got 2 of these already, tracking everything at any point in time. Oh, here's a protest, oh, here's a cash in transit heist. Within 30 seconds, anyone with an iPad can zoom in on that area. Really interesting technology. Mines, farming, and so forth. Really interesting. The Starlink satellite system linking the world together, meaning we are in a hyper-connected world. Fantastic satellites, 3,000 of them already there. I'm a bit worried about South Africa. We're going to be like the 20th country in Africa to adopt it instead of being the first, but we'll have to leave that to the regulators. The beauty with Starlink, it'll provide connectivity to 5G networks and the low frequencies. Here's the important thing from a technology perspective. The lower the frequency, the further the reach. The higher the frequency, the shorter the reach, but the higher the bandwidth. With 5G, we now have 700 and 800 megahertz on 5G, and within the next year and a half, if you have a 2G signal on your farm, you will get a 5G high-speed signal. That's a promise, because these technologies allow it. The problem is the backhaul between the base stations. That's why the satellite networks are important. Let's hope the regulator wakes up. This is the spectrum allocation in South Africa. 4 companies with 5G spectrum below 800 megahertz. That's the key. We are going to go into a hyper-connected world in South Africa in the next 2 years. Wonderful technologies will shape our world. Let's quickly share with you the IoT. You all know this, water measurement and so forth. But what are some other technologies? Let me quickly take you to 3 of them. 1, if we take a look at some technologies giving us a long distance, the problem is the battery life is always a concern. So when we talk about short distance, long battery life, but the problem is the distance. There are some technologies called low power wide area, 20 kilometers, battery life of 5 years. That means you can put a water meter up, but you're going to communicate with it once a day. And then finally, 5G, and you can get wonderful high-speed connectivity. The problem is the battery life, because you need to charge your phone every day. So with 5G, you just need a good energy source. We're going to see technologies that will be able to track you. I can use my phone to track my keys. I can get direction, and I can also find out exactly where it is and what the direction is. In the not too distant future, we're going to be able to utilize these technologies on farms. With Alexa coming to South Africa next year, they've got a built-in technology called Amazon Sidewalk. This allows you to track things. So if anyone steals your TV, you track it on your neighbor's Alexa. If your dog walks away, you see it over there. So you can call the guy, I see you got my TV, please bring it back. You will be able to track everything in the country based on these technologies in the not too distant future. Huge impact on insurance. On farms, you can roll out something called if this, then that. If the temperature does this, activate the sensor. Here's a quick overview of a SIO scanner. This is a small little scanner you have in your pockets. It's a molecular scanner, and you can immediately detect, for example, the moisture in corn. You can detect the chemical analysis of any product, or you can look at the leaf of a plant and get an automated response. We're going to see these type of things emerging. HoloLenses, not the same that Willie is giving out, but a HoloLens allowing the environment to be reflected in your eyes. This means very advanced tractors being sold in South Africa, and you say, okay, but who's going to repair them? You don't need to worry. Medium-skilled technician, because by wearing these goggles, someone in another place can look through the eyes of the technician and tell them exactly what to do in order to maintain it. So don't worry too much about advanced technology and who's going to maintain it. A brand new world will emerge with a HoloLens. Commercially available in South Africa. The SIO scanner, which we spoke about, you can use this on a farm to, for example, scan the moisture in corn. You can use it on a variety of ways. Fantastic little technology. Very soon, built into drones. Yes, that's going to be the next thing. The last point I want to talk about is smart cameras. Remember I told you that this is called the Inco Puco Suco, the Internet Connected Portable Supercomputer. I download an app and I redefine its function at the download of an app. We're going to be able to do that with cameras now. It's already possible. You download an app on the camera. There's an app store called Azina. I'm going to show it to you at the panel discussion. And then you can say, download the app to identify a potato disease. Download an app to identify the number of people walking in a gate. I download an app to do face recognition so I know which workers I have to pay. Automatic billing systems. Wonderful technologies that will happen with smart cameras. That's the website called Azina. You can even use it to look at tank levels because there's a temperature difference in a tank. And you can then say, camera, do the tank level. Same camera, track the number plates of all the trucks coming to load things. Unbelievable technology on your doorstep. You need to be aware of the digital twin that allows us to form part of our world. Just like the digital twin of Uber makes it more efficient, so will the digital twin on farms, for example, help you with stock management or tracking every single thing on your farm. The other presenters after me, after the tea break, will tell you how they will do this and how they do it today. Samcha will talk about it. The other speakers will talk about the entire world of digital mapping and the impact this will have on your productivity, and where you can track narrow areas on the farm and make sure that precision farming now becomes a distinct reality, not just an exercise. That idea of granularity, more and more granular, becomes a reality. Because you know what about these drones? You can have like 20 or 30 of these drones and they'll do their thing. They start at 7 in the morning when the sun comes up, and slowly but surely they do their thing. Wonderful opportunities to unlock productivity and making sure that your input costs are optimized. There's a fascinating journey ahead. Yes, the world is a scary place. We know that we're entering an era of unbelievable economic turmoil, but the technology will allow us, in the winter of the 5th wave and the spring of the 6th wave, the technology will unlock unbelievable productivity improvements. Some of the speakers will tell you that all the other grains, they've already had most of their growth. Potatoes is still on this growth phase, where the adoption of certain technologies and certain seeds will double your yield. I'm not the one saying it. Some of those that come a bit later will give you more specific statistics on our journey to 2050. Thank you so very much for your time. Talk about the new business models, the new mindset, the changes that you need in order to unlock the opportunity.